All right, here we go back on the Gill Athletics Track and Field Connections podcast. So glad you'd be here this summer of 2024. We've got a lot of fun things going on, right? We just had the Olympic trials. We've got Olympics going on. It's quite amazing. It is a great time for track sprint. The Netflix series is on. There's a lot of good stuff going on with track and field. And so I hope you are enjoying it. Hope you're participating, and I hope you're getting your friends and family involved with that as well. So today, I'm excited about this. I've known this young man for quite a while through different things with USATF and coaching and family, if you will. So I'm excited to learn more and more about his really interesting background, and I think you're going to enjoy it as well. Help me welcome from Seminole High School down there in the great state of Florida, the wise, the wonderful Mr. Ken Brauman. Ken, how are you today, sir?
Fantastic. Good morning to you. Good afternoon to me.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. We were talking about this a little bit before we hit record. So you're coaching high school that we'll get to here in Florida, but right now you find yourself in
Florence, Italy.
Florence, Italy. That's
Yes.
amazing. And you're not visiting. You're living. This is kind of a off season.
Yes. Going on 2 years now.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we'll explore that a little bit more. I'm a little jealous, I'm not gonna lie, especially after hearing about how good the food is. That's a important aspect for me. So Ken, and by the way, I just want to put this out there real quick because I've been thinking about this for a while. Ken and I have had this plan for a little bit of time. If you don't know, Ken is the father of Lance Brauman. Lance, some of you know, maybe more of you know today because of the Sprint series on Netflix. And I think that's so cool. I grew up in the coaching ranks with Lance in the JUCO world and the SEC world. But what I kind of want to put a caveat there is I am going to very consciously focus on Ken and his career. I do one day actually do want to reach out to Lance and have him on the show as well, but this is not the Lance show that Ken is on. This is the Ken show. So you won't hear much about Lance versus I might ask a question like, well, how's it, what was it like, having Lance along the Ken's career? I might ask that maybe, but I just wanted everybody to know I'm going to focus on Ken because his story matters and it's really stinking cool. So Lance, I know you're listening. So I love you, brother. You and I have a lot of history, a lot of great history. I love you so much. Super happy for all your success. And maybe we'll have you on the show here as well. And we can give you like a part two, the Brauman family, if you will. So Ken, if we think about track and field and the history you've had, it all has to begin somewhere. Where does track and field start for you?
Well, it starts back basically, I guess you'd say in middle school. I grew up in Iowa, small town in Iowa. And playing on the playground and so on and so forth. And one of my friends happened to be the son of the track coach at the local high school, Eagle Grove High School. So our elementary school was right next to the athletic field. And so he and I would start going over after elementary school, going over to the high school, watching the practices and running around on the track and so forth. And that got me interested. And then they have a very good junior high program in Iowa, middle school program now. And I got involved in track there, found out I could sprint a little bit. And so, ran relays in middle school at whatever local meets or middle school meets. Then got to the ninth grade when you could be out for high school track. So our coach, a guy by the name of Wally Hansen, who's in the Florida Track and Field Hall of Fame, we conditioned in the snow and so forth. But he was a coach a little bit ahead of his time, because we would go out in that sub-freezing weather and run, but he got us asthmatic masks to put on to filter the air so it wasn't searing our lungs while we were running. And as the snow disappeared, track season opened up the first week of April. He would have tryouts for different events, and everybody on the team would do every event. And I found out I could jump a little bit. So, long jump. And so after the tryouts, which was over a 2-day period, the third day he walked up and handed me a shovel and a rake and said, "You're a long jumper, take care of your pit." And so that's how the long jumping started. Um, we went on, we had a great high school program. His son, Brad Hanson, went on to the University of Wisconsin, where as a half miler, who scored in the Big Ten in the 800 and then qualified for the NCAAs also along the way. So, we were pretty good friends in high school. But we went on in high school. We won a state indoor championship, 2 state outdoor championships as a team.
Wow.
Um, we several Drake relays championships.
I was going to ask,
Seemed to,
Iowa has an amazing culture for track and field, but specifically
yes.
high school track and field today it feels like sometimes the Drake relays is, if it's not more important than the state meet, it seems like it's equal, at least. Like it's a big deal to qualify and
Oh
compete
yeah.
in Drake and as well as the state meet. Was it like that back then as well?
Oh, absolutely. Great things about the Drake relays. It had no classification system. And at that time, I don't know if it's changed, but at that time, only Iowa high schools
Same. Yep.
could compete in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big part of the year. And what's funny about that, there was a man who owned a sporting goods store, Vic Young. He owned a big sporting goods store in Des Moines. And so on our way going to Iowa City for the indoor meet, we stopped. He would take the team into the basement, and he had walls of Adidas track shoes. And that's where we got our track shoes for the year. We just went through them all. I mean, it was like a kid in the candy store seeing all of those track shoes. But we went on 2 years. We were the medley relay champions. I ran the 200 leg on those and then in 65 I won the Drake relays long jump in a rainstorm. So that was always a real highlight of my career. But we went on and we won state championships my junior and senior year as a team. A lot of great memories. My junior year, the state track meet was at the University of Iowa, and senior year it was at Drake University on
Oh,
their
wow.
old crushed brick red track. Again, it was a rainstorm at that time, and it rained so bad that there were 16 teams, and at that time the mile relay, and they didn't want to cancel the meet, so they ran all 16 teams in one heat of the mile relay,
Oh,
and
wow.
I was the leadoff runner, and we broke out after the first turn, and that was exciting. So,
16
but
teams, one heat, and I can't imagine the track was in that great of condition after rainstorms and
no, it
home meet.
wasn't. But yeah, but a lot of good memories doing that. And then I was lucky enough to receive a scholarship to Iowa State University.
So stop there. I'm glad that's a good segue because I'm always curious. So as you're going through track and field, you're going through high school, you're obviously having a lot of success. I assume that means you're having a lot of fun. Seems like you had a pretty good relationship with coach, and coach was really into track. His son goes on to
Yes.
run Wisconsin. So as you were looking towards college, you tell us you go to Iowa State. That'll make I've got several teammates here who are Iowa State alums. That'll make a lot of these guys and gals happy here. What were you thinking as far as a career? What did you go into major? Where was coaching at all in your purview at this point?
No, it wasn't. I was interested in political science. I really wanted to, when I finished college, to get out and work in a government type job. Whether it was within the state or federal government, and that was my interest at that time. And that's what I went to school for.
So Iowa State has had a litany of amazing coaches. Who were the coaches when you went there?
Well, the coach I had all 4 years when I was there was a man by the name of Bob Lawson.
Okay.
He a little bit of a background on him. He was the 1956 alternate in the Olympic decathlon.
Oh, wow.
Finished fourth in the decathlon trials. He had coached at Oregon State with Bernie, and then he coached with Bill Easton at the University of Kansas. And then he left Kansas to get the head job at Iowa State. And again, he was a coach ahead of his time. Very field event oriented coach, which I loved. I had choices, scholarship offers from Drake, University of Iowa, and then I had a bunch from the smaller colleges in the Midwest. I had several football scholarship offers from like Mankato State or Dakota Wesleyan or some of those schools. But I was a track guy and wanted to go to I guess you'd say big time track and field at a big school. And I really bought into his field event experience and so forth. So that's what pushed me there. Even though my father was a University of Iowa contributor financially.
Oh.
And I told him I was going to Iowa State. He didn't talk to me for 6 months after that.
So the family kind of grew up Hawkeye and you went
Yes,
Cyclone.
yes. Well, as the old joke goes, you have to be able to read to go to Iowa State.
Oh
So.
boy.
and they called us, Cyclone Tech, and we called them Iowa High School. So, but some of the old jokes. But anyway, I went to Iowa State, had a tremendous experience at Iowa State. I mean, I was real fortunate to go there educationally and athletically.
As you were going through, what because you've got experience now on a lot of different sides here. What did you experience the difference from the athlete side, from the athletic side of what track and field for a sprinter long jumper was in high school versus what a sprinter long jumper was in college?
Well, at that time,
Right.
of course, in high school, you played football, you played basketball. After basketball, you went out for track and field, as opposed to a college program where you started training the minute you got on campus,
Right.
all through the year until your season was finished. Big difference. Iowa State at the time, they weren't real successful in football. During that time period, unlimited scholarships, really. As much money as you had, you could get scholarships. Freshmen weren't eligible during that period. It was several years later they became eligible. But it was the training. We had an old dirt track, which was at that time it was the norm. For your Iowa State buddies, it was in the basement of the state gym, and it was dirt at the time. By my senior year, they had put down a tartan surface and an AstroTurf infield. But you'd go in training, you would come out, and I'm surprised none of us got TB or black lung disease from the dirt in there. So as a result, we never had any home indoor track meets.
Wow.
Always on the road. Our outdoor track was a crushed brick track at the time. We had one dual meet a year there. In my senior year, we had the Big 8 championships there, but those were the only home meets we had. We were on a bus, traveling every weekend from the second week in January
Wow.
till the end of season. Going to Drake was like having a home meet,
Right.
or going to University of North or Northern Iowa was
Yeah.
having a home meet at that time.
That's funny because
So
of how different it is today. Iowa State has one of the top indoor facilities there is in the country, and so they're always.
yes,
That's funny how that changed. Hey, I'm curious. You brought up something that's interesting. I'm not sure a lot of people know. Maybe our younger audience doesn't know. You brought up that during this time period, freshmen were not allowed to compete. That used to be a rule, by
correct.
the way. It also used to be when
Hmm.
they changed that rule, by the way. That was one of the things that was going to destroy amateur athletics, NCAA as well. We've had a lot of these things that were going to supposedly destroy the NCAA. So it's interesting. But when I coached college, the same experience you talked about there about most of the kids that I coached did something else in high school. So they did
Yes.
football or basketball or whatnot. And they had to experience coming into a college program where there was nothing to get their competitive juices going during the fall. We had to wait until, back then, January. We didn't do very many
Hmm.
December meets. How did so you didn't get to compete all for, like, you had a year and a half, let's say, before you got to actually go back and compete.
Well,
How did you handle that?
actually, KU, University of Kansas, at the Kansas Relays had some events for college freshmen.
Oh,
So uh, I went with the varsity team to the Kansas Relays, where I competed in the long jump. So that was one meet, and then the AAU had some open meets during the year. So like Drake had a AAU indoor championship I competed in, and there was an AAU outdoor championship I competed in. So I had some competitive opportunities
okay.
back then.
So it was you. The rule was you couldn't compete on the varsity team.
Correct.
Okay, but there were some opportunities still.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Just for instance, in football, they actually had a freshman football team at Iowa State, and they had some games against other Big Eight schools that had
Right.
freshman football teams.
Yeah. I wonder why that was the rule and then why they changed it. And it kind of makes, like, it's kind of I feel like it's a duh question of why they changed it. It's like, well, why should a freshman not be allowed to compete just because they're first
Right.
year of college? But
Yeah, I have no idea.
yeah,
I always thought it was for academic reasons,
right.
that someone went to college and they got involved in the academics and they proved that they were students and so forth,
Right.
which, in today's world has nothing to do with going to college.
Right. Yeah, that
So,
has changed a little bit, that's for sure. Okay, so that's interesting. I love that. So you're competing at Iowa State. You're noticing you're thriving through the differences from high school to college. You're studying political science. Political
yes,
silence. Sometimes it should be political silence.
sure.
Political poli-sci. When you graduate, so where does spoiler alert, this is a track coaching podcast. Where does
Hmm.
coaching, did it ever change during college, or
Well,
did you go into a
eh,
regular career?
well, as that's interesting because as I there were 14 of us our freshman year who came in on scholarships. By the time I reached my senior year in college, there were three of us left.
Hmm.
Uh, the others had either transferred away or couldn't make it academically or got married and quit college. I mean, the typical college type things. And I was one of two field eventers. There was a discus thrower, good friend of mine, and then myself as a jumper. And the younger kids would start coming to some of us for advice and asking about things. And so I guess you say we became a leader by default because we were the only ones left. We'd gone through, all the hassle. Uh, and it was during that time that I was the by default the captain of the horizontal jumpers. And so I would help train or look over technique for some of these younger kids. And my coach, Coach Lawson, he said, you have a pretty good eye for seeing technique. He said, you ought to think about coaching. And I said, well, I love what I'm doing. Maybe I'll look at that. So I graduated from Iowa State, went to University of Northern Iowa for a semester. I had to do my student teaching yet as a teacher. And so I had to come back after the spring of my senior year to do my teaching. And we were on a quarter system back then. So I student taught for 6 weeks, had to come back to school for 6 weeks to finish up a few things and help coach the track team. When I came back, I graduated in December, went straight to University of Northern Iowa to get into a graduate program. Applied for a graduate assistantship at Iowa State for the next year. I received it, so I came back to Iowa State and got into my master's program. And I taught classes in the physical education department, and then I assisted on the track team. This will take a little bit of time because I think it's kind of a fascinating story. So anyway, I was going to get a master's degree in higher education. And I had to pick a major professor. So I went over to the college to talk with a man by the name of Ray Bryan, who was the head of the department. And I sat down and told him, I wanted to coach, and gave him my background. And he knew my name from competing at Iowa State and so forth. So he sat there, and he was a pretty old guy. He was close to retirement at the time. And he says, he said, I used to be a basketball coach in Kansas High School when I was young, he said. And we got to basketball games because we drove the repo cars from the people who were selling alcohol illegally in Kansas at the time. And he said, and that's what we used for transportation. We had a great talk and so forth. And I mean, he picked my brain, and he said, he says, I think you ought to go into counseling. And I said, really? And he says, yeah, it fits with coaching to be counseling the athletes on the team. He said, it makes you more sellable out in the real world if you're a counselor, because there aren't many male counselors. There are mainly female counselors in the school system. So I said, okay. And so I went the counseling route. And that's what I got my master's degree in. And went that route. Well, during this whole time, Iowa high schools have had a tremendous girls athletic programs for years and years and years. I mean, when I got to Florida, they didn't even have girls athletics in high schools, but in Iowa, it had been going on for decades. Well, there was a young lady who was an Iowa phenom named Kathy Carroll. There was no women's athletics at the University of Iowa at the time, at Drake University or Iowa State University. Well, she lived in Carroll, Iowa, which was probably 30 minutes from Ames. Well, she came to Iowa State my first year in graduate there, and walked into the head coach's office, who was Jerry Barlin at the time. Bob Lawson had resigned and gone to Wisconsin Parkside after my senior year. And a guy by the name of Tom Rosandich, you know that name? He was big in track and field in the U.S. back then. In fact, he started the program at the U.S. Sports Academy in Mobile.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
He left Parkside, went down there and started that program. You know, there's a lot of connection with
Uh-huh.
people over the years that you run into. And so Kathy walked into Coach Barlin's office and said, I want to run track here at Iowa State. And he said, we don't have a women's program. She said, can we start one? And he says, well, you can start a track club, Iowa State Women's Track Club. And, you know, she was a sprinter, long jumper, so forth. So she said, okay, well, because I was a graduate assistant and, you know, he was being paid to run the men's program. He asked me if I would train her. So it was she and I trained her. Uh, that first year, uh, there were a couple other females who wanted to become part of it. The second year, uh, we decided to put some information out. So Kathy published in the student newspaper. We had a meeting, and we had a good handful of girls who wanted to run. One of them, whose name was Peg Nepple, who, you know, if you remember back in those days in the 60s and very early 70s, a female could only run up to 1,500 meters.
That's
They couldn't
crazy.
run beyond that. So
Right.
Peg had been a state champion from a small town in Iowa. She came out. Eventually, she became the first female American record holder at 5,000 meters and made some international teams. This is all down the road. So she ended up going back to Iowa State to work on a doctorate degree, but at a competition somewhere in Africa had contacted some kind of disease, and she ended up passing away at a very young age from that disease. But you know, we actually had a track and field program, and we would go to some of the AIAW meets, you know, to Northwest Missouri State, Graceland College, you know, some of those. And we would win most of those meets with 6 or 7 girls. And you know, being a JUCO coach and everything, you'll appreciate this, how some of those teams conspired against us so we couldn't win a meet. You know, they would pull a 4x4 at the end of the meet. So those were some fun days. And so basically, uh, you know, I guess you could say I was kind of the co-founder of the Iowa State women's program doing that. When I finished my master's degree in the summer of 72, I went to a man by the name of Chris Murray, who had been the distance coach at Iowa State when Coach Lawson was there. He wasn't rehired by Coach Barlin to be the distance coach because Coach Barlin had hired some vague guy by the name of Bill Bergen as the distance coach. So anyway, Chris stayed in the physical education department. So when I was finishing my master's degree, I went to Chris and I said, there's a good group of girls here. I don't know if you guys are going to go AIAW with them or so forth, but you know, Kathy still had 2 years of school left to compete. And I said, can you take all these girls over for me? When I say all, there weren't all that many. He said, sure. Well, I left to come to Florida to coach. And he took over the program. They went into the AIAW, won several national championships, and eventually into the NCAA. And Kathy went on to, in fact, the first article I ever wrote for a journal was the coaching a 19-foot female long jumper. And so I went through her training program that we had. But she went on, made a couple of international track and field teams, and then ended up marrying some guy by the name of Al Order.
Wow.
And you know, Kathy now lives in Florida,
Florida.
in Fort Myers. You if you recall, Al went on in retirement and started the Art of the Olympians.
Hmm.
And Kathy and one of Al's daughters are the individuals who
Yep.
run that nonprofit now. She just finished being up in Paris because they're doing a big thing art-wise in Paris. So,
Hmm.
it's sometimes you just get lucky, or track and field's a small world, and you fall into things. And so finished my master's degree. Uh, had a choice to coach track and field in Iowa or track and field in Florida. Well, there's no choice. And so Lance was like, I think he had just turned maybe 2 at the time. Uh, we loaded up. Finished my master's degree on a Friday, drove to Palatka, Florida, a place I'd never seen before. Started work on Monday morning.
Wow. All right.
And
Let's pause there before we get to the Florida part, because
sure.
I think it's really important. And we've had some amazing people, Karen Dennis from the Ohio State, Sue
Hmm.
Humphreys, where, we've had these women who were growing up during this time, who were going through as a competitor during this time when there were a little bit of air quotes here, no competitive opportunities, certainly a lack of opportunities for women. And, it's funny you say, I think sometimes it's important for us to make sure we're remembering history so that we can continue to move forward positively in
Hmm.
today's world. So he's right when he talked about women were not allowed to run more than 800, 1,500 meters. It's crazy. You go back and you look at some of the news clippings in the science, big time air quotes here behind it, and it was like women will die. Their
Yes.
whole female reproductive system will just fall out if they run marathons and things like this, which we know today is just absolutely ridiculous. And what's kind of, I don't want to say scary, but it's not that far removed from where we are today in 2024. Remember, pole vault, steeple, and hammer are all relatively new events for women. I think 96 was the first women's pole vault, 2000 was the first steeple, and 2004 was the first hammer, I believe, for the Olympics for women. So if that date's right, I think 2004 was the latest one, the new one. That's only 20 years ago. 20 years ago,
Hmm.
women were not allowed to throw the hammer or run the steeple. I mean, and today I hope people realize how mind-boggling that is, but that's what we lived in not too long ago. As you can, I love this. I did not know this part of your history. I love this part. As you were taking on the role of coaching, it's a women's team, whether you had 4, 6, 10, obviously a small squad because there wasn't even any like importance to women's athletic. There wasn't people,
Right.
encouraging women to do more athletics. So you had a small squad there. As you were going to these meets that did have opportunities for women's track and field, what was the environment like? And what I mean by that is, were there, like, did you get sneers and jeers from some of your peers? I did not mean to rhyme like that, by the way. Like, did you feel vitriol from fellow coaches, or was it like, okay, that's cute, Ken, stay over there? Or was it welcomed? Was it like, hey man, this is awesome, we need to?
Well, that's a hard one to answer because most of the women's team is at that time in the Midwest were female coaches
Mm,
and not male coaches.
right.
And we would go to meets and I really didn't know any of the female coaches or so forth. My realm was still in the male part of track and field. We had no budget. We would take my car. I paid for the gas. The girls would chip in everything. I mean, we were just kind of almost a JUCO
Yeah, I was
team.
gonna say, I know this one. Yeah.
But with no money, I remember some of Lance's stories about
Yeah.
traveling.
Yeah.
But the uh, we had Iowa girls, and they had all been involved in track and field in high school,
Right.
so they knew what it was about.
Yeah. Okay.
And some of the girls on other teams in the Midwest, they were just kind of new to the sport and so forth. And collegiate wise, I don't know how much money was given to women at that time to come to compete at a college or a university. I think they more or less relied on walk-ons also to do that. But when you had a Peg Nepple who won the 1500 every time she stepped on the track, and a Kathy Carroll who won the 1, the 2, the long jump, and even talked her into running the 4x4, which was tough to begin with. Anyway, I mean, we had a very that's a lot of points
Yeah.
right there, and then the other girls filled in with those.
I love that you struggled to get a sprinter to run the 4x4 even back then, by the way.
Yes,
That's not new
yeah,
today, folks.
no, it's not. And they were remarkable young ladies, and we had 2 real horses to drive them.
Yeah.
Uh, so it was unique. It was fun. They had a great time. They just enjoyed competing. There was no demands placed on them that if you don't do this, you're
Right.
not going to run. Uh, I'm not that kind of guy anyway.
Right.
But they just enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. It was a great experience for me as it was for them.
That's awesome. How did this is a time period before internet, cell phones, all of that kind of stuff. How did you, like, I did not know you were from Iowa. I assumed you were from Florida because that's always where I've known you
Mhm.
from. How does a guy, still a kid, you're still young here, with a family, how do you even find out about an opportunity to go to Florida?
Well, that's another great story. I'm full of great
That's
stories.
why I've
When
got
you
you
get
here.
old, you tell the stories.
That's right.
But I was a graduate assistant during my master's degree. I was sitting in my office one day with snow all over the place, reading a track and field news issue.
Nice.
And this had to be probably the winter of maybe 71. Could have even been 72. But anyway, I was reading about Jimmy Carnes of the Florida Track Club.
Yeah.
And back at that time, I was still competing as a triple jumper
Oh, wow. Okay.
back at that time. I was I was a pretty consistent over 50-foot jumper
Wow.
back during those days. So, I was going to meets on the side myself, to some of these that were open meets. And I looked at that and I says, that's a place I would like to be. So just out of nowhere, I wrote Jimmy Carnes a letter. And I said that I was finishing up my master's degree. I wanted to coach and teach, and I wanted to continue coaching and competing. And I would love to come to Gainesville to do that. Then I sent him a letter, and he answered it.
Wow.
I mean, that's fan. Actually sent me a letter back. He didn't know me from anybody, and
Right.
it wasn't like I was one of these elite guys that,
Right.
yeah, we want you to come down here. Well, he sent me a letter back
Awesome.
and basically said we would love to have someone uh, who comes in and contributes to the community, just not athletically. And now, to tell you what kind of man he was, he sent me the information on how to get certified as a counselor in the state of Florida. He sent me all the job openings in Alachua County, where Gainesville's located, and all the surrounding counties, all of the job openings at that time. So I started applying for jobs.
Wow. Jimmy was the first internet. He was sending
He
you the
was,
info.
yeah,
Wow.
he was fantastic. And in fact, just to skip ahead just a hair, in 1975, he brought Brooks Johnson in to coach.
Oh,
We'll get to that part.
that's awesome.
But anyway,
I love that story about Jimmy Carnes because that is and it's not a surprise. And what I mean by that is I've heard that from a lot of other coaches. I think that's the one of the superpowers of track coaches. Because, to your point, he had, yeah, I'll say it this way. He had nothing to gain by helping you. He
No,
also
absolutely not.
he also could have not gone as far as he did to help you, and it still would have been a big help. I mean, just the writing back and like maybe even just an encouragement of like, yeah, you should move here. This is a great place. That would have done a lot for you. But then to actually take time from, he was a busy guy, to take time from his life and schedule and to send all these, how to get certified as a counselor. Here's all the job. I mean, that's that extra step that I hear a lot from track coaches, and I love hearing that. I love hearing that a guy like Jimmy Carnes, who I've never met and obviously know him by name, a legend, no doubt. But hearing that kind of like, oh, okay, a lot of these positive things I've heard, yeah, maybe I'm not even scratching the surface of the positivity of a Jimmy Carnes.
So yeah, I mean, he was the man in Florida track and field,
Certainly, yeah,
in more ways than one. And if we have time, we can talk a little bit about him later here.
yeah.
But so I applied for jobs in the area and had the principal from Palatka South High School call me and say that they had a counseling position open. And they were losing a coach to another school. And so there would be a track position open also.
Wow.
And it was getting close to the start of school. And so and he had my resume and all my stuff from their county office where I had sent it to, and he asked me if I would like to have the job. And I said, sure. So, like I said, I finished my master's degree on a Friday. We drove to Florida. I started work on a Monday
Wow.
and absolutely loved the community and everything there. And so getting into high school coaching in Florida, uh, completely different culture
Hmm.
than being in Iowa. They were just finishing integrating schools at that time in the South.
Hmm.
And so there were some trying times. And thank goodness for athletics back then because they brought communities together
Hmm.
and accepted some things that people weren't really excited about
Hmm.
at times. Uh, Moved down there and had an athletic director by the name of Billy Bennett, very godly individual. Couldn't have had a better role model to fit into how an athletic program should be run and the type of person you should be. Um, he was the type of man that, well, backtrack just a hair. In order to coach track, I also had to coach football
Ah.
because that was the thing at that time. There were no women athletics. So to be a track coach, I had to coach football. So I was coaching on the freshman football, which meant we had to scout on Friday nights also and give scouting reports on Saturday
Right.
and this, that, and the other type thing. But he was the type of man that if on the practice field you cursed at a kid, he fired you on the spot as a coach. There's no
Wow.
cursing around kids or at kids. Absolutely not. And now to this day, 52 years later, you know, I say bad words every now and then.
Sure.
Never at practice, never toward an individual.
That's
That is something I don't allow it on my team.
right.
We allow no racial language out there, regardless of who you are.
Right.
Uh, there's no cursing, and I live by that. Now, when I'm away, yeah, I will
Yeah.
curse, but
Yeah.
uh, I learned that from him, and that was a very tight knit community. As a coach, to tell you how conservative this community was, if you wanted to buy a 6-pack of beer, you had to go to a different town to buy it. because if the grocer knew you and saw you buying beer, he called the athletic director and said your coach is drinking beer. I mean, that's how conservative that community was at the time. It was a great place to bring up
Yeah.
kids. Great place to bring up kids.
Yeah.
Uh, if you wanted to see a parent, you didn't have any worries because every Wednesday night, all the churches had potluck dinners.
Mhm.
And so you just went to whatever church they went to and you could find their parent. You talked to their parents. So it was a very great, rewarding experience there. And that's how I learned to coach in that
Yeah.
community. Spent 11 years there.
Wow. How did we talked about your ground floorness of women's athletics. You mentioned when you moved to Florida, they were either going through integration or just had gone through. I don't know if there was ever a timeline where it was just done. Was Iowa integrated at the time, or was this new to you? Like, what was your experience with integration as you were moving to Florida during this time?
I had none.
So-
Yeah, the only thing I knew is that we had several black athletes on the team. One of them by the name of Steve Carson, who you might have heard of his daughter Kim Carson,
Oh yeah.
who
Okay.
used to coach Lolo.
Yes.
Steve was a national champion at 600 yards indoors.
Wow.
Heck of a quarter miler. Grew up in Red Oak, Iowa. He's from Iowa, Red Oak, Iowa. I think I'm not sure if he's back in Des Moines or if he lives in Atlanta right now.
Okay.
I haven't talked to him in a number of years. Uh, so, we traveled as a team. Um, we never went at that time in the South to
Mm-hmm.
compete because
Mm-hmm.
there were still some problems. They had told me a story about a couple of years before that. I think it might have been 1962 or 63. And I won't name the state, but they had gone to a relay meet there and they were told the black athletes couldn't stay in that hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And so that became kind of the thing that we didn't do when I was at Iowa State, even
Mm-hmm.
though things were changing with the 64 Civil Rights Act and
Mm-hmm.
the 65 Voting Rights Act and so forth. So, but no, it was my first experience.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and, now the community I was in Palatka had very few problems integrating, but we had great sports teams.
Mm-hmm.
And that was important. There were some other communities that had a number of difficulties with that.
Mm-hmm.
And we as coaches experienced some of those difficulties as we traveled athletically and so forth. But that's another story for another
Yeah,
time.
yeah. No, it's good to get the landscape of what it was. You're still coaching today, so to be able to talk with someone who actually was going through it. I mean, it's not just things that we hear in the history books or on social media or in a documentary. To know that these are actual real things that were happening. So it's good to get that perspective. I appreciate that very much. So you're at Palatka for 11 years?
11 years, yes.
How did so you had obviously you were a high school athlete, but the bulk of your coaching experience during the grad work was in the college setting. Now you're back to coaching high school. How did it is different, and you're coaching football, so you're back to that. You play football and then maybe you play basketball, then you do track. But you're in Florida where people can maybe do track earlier. How did you adjust and get into like the groove of high school coaching?
Well, as I said, we had an athletic director
Hmm.
who wasn't one of these people. There's spring football in Florida
Right.
on the high school level. He wasn't one of these football coaches who said these kids have to do spring ball and not do track.
Oh.
He was one of these people who said when your track season's over, they come to spring football.
Hmm.
So, like I said, he was a perfect person to
Yeah.
work with. So we, back then there were no rules on when you could start practice or anything. Well, we went through football season and normally they were in the playoffs, which went deep into went to Thanksgiving or maybe the week after Thanksgiving. So we started conditioning for track and field in January. And those kids who weren't out for winter sport, we did our conditioning. And, we had some kids who were very good track athletes who were playing basketball and so forth and wanted to come and condition. But my rule at that time, which it still is, that when you finish your sport, then you come to my sport.
Right.
I'm not going to have you come while you're in another sport.
Right.
And that's the way it operated. And we went through conditioning. We started our first meets, and they were all outdoor meets. Were about mid-February when we started. And then we would have, at that time, we would have a invitational we would go to on a weekend, and then we would have a Tuesday meet where all those athletes who couldn't go on the weekend, they competed in that Tuesday meet. And that's the way we kept our team big.
We're going to learn about some deep participation, leadership in Team USA type stuff during this 10 years, during this first block in Florida. Were you doing anything beyond high school coaching, coaching education, Team USA, anything like that? Or was it strictly, call it getting your feet wet, of counseling and coaching track and football?
Well, it was basically getting my feet wet. I was in a community where we were 45 miles from anywhere. And so in the summer, I would have I ended up coaching cross country too, but I was coaching cross country and football.
Oh.
So after football practice, I would have cross country practice in the fall. So we would have cross country practice in the summer. Also, I would take kids to up to Orange Park, which is in the Jacksonville area. They were running open meets for kids at that time, I think on Tuesday nights or whatever. So some of the track kids who would want to go, we would go up there, and we didn't do any type of training. They just went up there and ran and had a good time, and they kept their interest up. And excuse me, we did that until after the 4th of July, because Palatka at that time was a big migrant area. A lot of migrant people in that area, had a lot of migrant kids on the track team. So, after the 4th of July, people, or the migrants from further south, and Sanford being one of them, where I ended up coaching now, they would move up, pick up the migrant workers from Palatka, and then start moving up country, during farm work and so forth. So that kind of ended the summer outings with the track team. But no, I wasn't involved in, at that time it was AAU. There was no TAC or USA track and field at that time. It was basically AAU. So, I wasn't involved in anything at that time, really.
Did you establish a relationship with Jimmy Carnes when you moved down?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I would go over once a week and train with the jumpers over there.
Yeah.
And help them. So yeah, and then I would I would still jump in the meets. In fact, I went to Palatka the fall of 72, and I was the 73 and 74 Florida Relays triple jump champion. So I was still training at that time and jumping for the Florida Track Club, and would go to meet
famous.
with them and so forth. So yeah, I had a relationship with Jimmy at that time.
And, I've explained before on the podcast, I am a huge coaching education advocate because, in my work now, I'm a very big professional development advocate. And so I always describe coaching education as kind of two things. Both are, I think, equally important. I don't know that there's one that's more important than the other. One is the what I'll call the official coaching, the formal coaching education. So USATF level ones. Today we have USTF CCA, things like that. That's very important. And then and this was probably more available versus the formal back during this time. And it's the unofficial coaching education, and that's sitting down with your peers and talking. Are you picking Jimmy Carnes or any other coach's brains at this point about how to coach more or better, or is everybody kind of still in their own lane?
Well, that really started when I was in college.
Hmm.
Uh, when we would go to meets, um, of course, Coach Lawson was the type of guy that you didn't go out and party and so forth, when you went to a meeting. Some of the guys did it, but he had bed checks back then for us. Uh, when we were outside the hotel, we had to be in a coat and tie when we went out. And you can imagine being in Boulder, Colorado in 1968, you're out in a coat and tie, and you walk into a clothing store and a woman comes up and says, "You're not from around here, are you?" Because, the sign of the times back then. But I would sit around I really enjoyed, and some people called me a nerd for doing this, but I enjoyed sitting around and listening to the coaches talk. You had J.D. Martin from Oklahoma, who was coaching at the time. You had Bob Thiel from uh, Missouri, Griak from Minnesota, DeLoss Dodds was the coach at K-State back then. And then you had Bob Timmons from Kansas. All of those coaches just sat around talking. They talked about recruiting, uh, the problems with recruiting at their prospective schools, and this, that, and the other. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot from them at that time, and really interested me. And I think that's another reason I started to go the coaching route.
Right.
Um, but being in Palatka, I was kind of in a vacuum there, being 45 miles from anywhere.
Right.
And there were other coaches from other communities, who I knew and we spoke with from time to time. But there was really no sitting down, exchanging ideas about training and so forth. I was um, I taught at some coaching clinics, like the FACA clinic that you've been to. And I got involved in the FACA as a track and field chairman from our district, and then moved up the ladder to the vice chair, and finally as chairman of the FACA track and field committee. So I got involved that way.
We'll come back to that because I'm always curious about the motivation, the reasoning for the leadership side. Because, coaching, whether it's high school or college, coaching your own team is enough. What I mean by that is that's hard enough to be a head coach or an assistant coach and work with your squad and help, with all the other things, especially with high schoolers, teaching, et cetera. So I'm always interested in why doing those volunteer things. You've done a lot more to further the conversation, and we'll come back to those a little bit. Is you said you were 11 years at
Palatka.
Palatka. Thank you. Where to next and why?
Well, the my first principal in Palatka ended up going to the school board office as an associate superintendent of schools, and then got a job at Seminole County, Florida. And there was a job opening at the Seminole High School in Sanford, and he called me and said, "There's a track job open They've got a counseling position, kind of familiar with how I ended up in. And he said, I've talked to the principal, calling and go for an interview. So I said, okay. After researching, Florida's kind of funny. There's no statewide teachers pay scale in Florida. Each county has their own pay scale, and depending on the affluence of the county, depends on the amount of money you're being paid. So I went down and interviewed, and a great man. I mean, he was, I ended up loving working with him because it was either this way or not this way. There was no in between with him. And he was great to work with from that standpoint. I went to an interview and he asked me about my counseling experience because that's the primary concern. He knew about my track experience. During my 11 years at Palatka, we only lost one track meet from the district level on down. And we won 3 regional and 2 state championships at that time. So I had a pretty good resume. And going in and so he asked me questions, and then his other question was, why do you want to come here? He says, you got a great program there. And I said, well, we've competed against your school in the past, and you have great athletes here. And I think we can have the same program here that I had in Palatka, if not better. And he said, is that the only reason? And I started laughing. I said, well, if I come here, I'm going to get a $14,000 a year pay raise. And he started laughing at that time. He said, well, that's now I know why. And I said, but really, I said, I want to come to the Orlando area. I don't want to have to drive 2 hours to a track meet all the time. At that time, we were in a region with Pensacola.
Oh,
so
wow.
one year we would host the region in Palatka. The next year we'd go to Panama City or Pensacola, drive in a school bus of kids ourselves. And, I wanted to be in a more metropolitan area. It was a small town in a metropolitan area. And he says, well, I fired my last track coach. And I kind of shrugged my shoulders. I didn't know what to say. I said, okay. So that's how I started out at Seminole High School.
Wow. So
And
I don't think I realized this. So you started back then and you're still coaching there today. So you've been at the Seminole High School this whole time?
Yes, love it.
Wow.
Love it. I've loved the school. I've loved the community. I've loved the kids. I've never had a bad day there. I've enjoyed going to work every day there, coaching. There are bad things that have happened there, of course, but no, I mean, going out and working with the kids that I've worked with, I mean, it's always been great. Great kids.
So that always leads me into a questioning because you started there. So what year would you have started then?
83.
83. So 83 all the way today in 2024. So so I always want to take these opportunities when I have experiences like this, because if you've listened to some of the answers of Ken today, it could be easily said that maybe not a lot of things have changed. And what I mean by that is he talked about in college, you talked about there were no scholarship limits. We're talking about that today in 2024. Some things have changed, right? Freshmen are allowed to compete, things like that. I love the story about the struggle of getting her to run the 4x4. Again, people think, I hear stuff all the time today. These kids are soft and they don't want to run 4x4. And it's like, maybe we've been like that our whole lives, So what have you seen? You started at Seminole High School in 83, coached for a decade before in the high school side as well. You're seeing high school kids today. What has really changed in your opinion, about 14 to 18-year-old kids, specifically the ones that are attracted to track and field?
Well, again, everything's changing as we speak. Florida now has high school NIL.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And well, I'll approach it from a couple standpoints. I'll talk about athletes nowadays as compared to the older days, and then we'll talk about track and field in general.
Yeah.
When I first started coaching at Palatka and at Seminole High School, kids were zoned to a certain school. And those kids competed for that zone, and it was only under extreme extenuating circumstances could they transfer to another school outside of your zone. Seminole County at that time had 6 high schools, I think, in the county. So the kids who lived in Sanford came to Seminole High School.
Right.
Now, athletically, you're talking about a school who was a school of Tim Raines, Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, Jeff Blake, quarterback, for Cincinnati. I mean, and even in this day and age, you have Gabe Davis, who played for Buffalo and is now with the Jaguars. I mean, there were good athletes within that community. It was similar to Palatka. So that's why I told the principal that we could have the same type of program at that school, because they had never had it. It had always been kind of a disorganized program. It hadn't been structured. He went into all of this with me, and I could see it because I could see the type of athletes. And so that's why I went there. In this day and age now, kids can go anywhere they want. And that basically started sometime in the 90s. See, and again, going back to the segregation days, integration days, there was a 1972 federal court order where schools had to stay integrated. They had to be integrated. And you had to have certain percentages of individuals in the school. Yeah, in the Orlando area, you could they had what they called a majority minority rule, to where if you were in the minority in a predominantly minority school, you could go to someone to add to their percentages. I mean, the federal government and all of this stuff. Well, in the 90s, they had and I can't remember the official term for it. It was called unitary status or something, to where in order to get out of that federal court order of 1972, then you had to meet certain criteria with the federal government. And we, at the time, our school, Seminole High School, was probably pretty close to even minority Caucasian. There were some differences. So in order to get out of that, part of the thing was to have to get more kids into the school to meet the percentages. So that's when they started putting in international baccalaureate programs, Academy of Health Careers. I mean, all arts and programs in all the different schools in Florida. That was one way they could get around all of this and bring the schools up to whatever the federal government required. Well, at that time, then, if there was say a CSI program at one high school, Well, that was a way a kid could leave a high school to get into that CSI program at the other school. And so coaches, I'll be honest, coaches use that as recruiting tools from one to another. And so then everything started to move around. And it has gotten progressively worse, progressively worse. Parents shop kids around to schools nowadays. Uh, and a lot of parents think that my son's a football player. If I send him to this school, he's going to get a D1 scholarship, and then he's going to go professional. He has better chance at this school than this other school. Nobody's going to notice him, so on and so forth. And so they will shop kids around and move them from school to school. You see some kids in 4 years in high school at 4 different schools in 4 years. It can be positive for a football program or a basketball program. It doesn't happen often in track and field, and I refuse to play that game. I'm too damn old for that. But on the negative side, you take a program with a great football program, and then kids who have lived in that community, whose parents have gone to school there, they're going to school there. And now because other kids have moved in, they're not going to get to play, so they move out to a different school. So you have a lot of shuffling from high school to high school, and that's the negative part of that. And in the state of Florida right now, you can, as long as you provide your own transportation, you can go to any high school where they have a seat for you.
Is that right?
If they're not at capacity, if I have let's say I have a young man who's a great track athlete, who wants to go to St. Thomas, no, I use a public school, Miami Northwestern, and they still have space for students. As long as they have their own transportation, he can transfer. No questions asked. The other thing that's popular now, and in the state of Florida, I don't know about nationally, is you can be declared homeless and go to any school you want to go to. And some people do that to get their kids in the schools where they want to go. And, that's all a federal program, and it's basically no questions asked type. So there's a lot of movement in this day and age. When you get back to it, 52 years down the road, you're probably better off in a Palatka nowadays than you are in a more cosmopolitan area, metro area, to where there's so much movement. So, kids come and go. And that's pretty Pacific. I can tell you that I have a hurdler who's a junior, didn't come out for track until his sophomore year, who, working with him 2 years, ended up 4th in the state in the big class in Florida, in the 110 hurdles, who, because he's not up at the top of the depth chart in football, who is moving to a private school for his senior year. So someone you've worked with for 2 years, they're going to go somewhere else. And, it's frustrating at times, but you've got to roll with it.
Yeah.
Because that's the climate of the situation.
It's interesting to hear you describe this, because if I hadn't told people, and if you hadn't mentioned high school, they would hear that story and go, oh, I wonder what college he coaches at, talking about transfers and work with them for a year and they get good, then they transfer and all this kind of stuff. I never even dreamt that this kind of issue was going on the high school level.
Well, this is in Florida. Like I said, I don't know about anywhere else.
Right.
But so it can be a difficult situation. Occasionally we'll get a pretty good athlete who moves in, which is great. But it's not something that I nor my assistant coaches, we don't go out and tell kids to move in or
Mhm.
to move out. I mean, we had a kid who, as a sophomore, jumped over 47 feet in the triple jump, finished fourth in the state his sophomore year, moved to another community
Mhm.
that has a top-notch football program, and started as safety on a state championship football team this year. So, you work with kids, and they have priorities, their parents have priorities, and that's just the way it is. Now, other than that,
Mhm.
there's a great influx now of youth track and field programs, club programs,
Mhm. Mhm.
which is good and bad. It's good to get kids involved in track and field. However, some people have found a way to make a living off doing that. And so they have these programs with a lot of kids, charging them to compete. And I don't know if you remember, but back in the old days, it used to be the city recreation departments who
Yeah.
used to have these youth programs and all sports for the kids in the summer.
Mhm.
Now you have Little League football, Little League baseball, Little League track and field, so to speak. And, they're taking these kids all over the country to
Mhm.
these youth track meets and so forth. And um, in youth football, I saw the other day where in some youth football program, this like 10 and 11-year-old, they won a national championship and they got huge championship rings for winning. I mean, that's, uh, it's, some things are getting out of hand at that.
Mhm.
But on the other side, you have club soccer that parents are paying tremendous amount of money for. You have AAU basketball, and now especially in basketball, you have these uh, individuals who I'll say are reps for kids, and they'll put them in other program. They'll put them in
Mhm.
high school programs. And it used to be that the Montverde academies, that
Mhm.
don't play in a state championship, which Lance's wife works there.
Oh,
But they don't play in the state series, so they don't play for a high school state championship because they recruit from all over.
right.
And just like IMG does that,
Mhm.
they don't compete against the other schools. They compete outside in their national tournaments and so forth. Uh, for the elite, that's fine to do that. But now, you have individuals who are telling kids you need to go here, or
Mhm.
uh, because you're on my club soccer team, you don't need to be playing high school soccer. That's
Mhm.
detrimental to you. And for some reason, um, some parents think that if you pay a coach to do something, you're going to get more out of it
Right.
than if you send them to a high school to where they have multiple athletes.
Right.
So, I mean, all of that has changed tremendously, and it is frustrating. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm old. Whatever comes to Seminole High School, I coach. Uh, my assistant coaches are all Seminole High School former athletes of mine who
Oh, wow.
graduated from Seminole High School. They know how I am. They know how to deal with me, how to handle me. Uh, because I believe you need to have a stake in the
Mm.
community, know the people in the community, and they've come from that community, and
Mhm.
and so they have a great handle on it, and and I'll have people get mad because I won't hire someone else because I think it's important that they uh, know these people. And when I retire, I'm hoping one of them gets the job
Yeah.
when I retire.
So the kids that you have coached, have you noticed any difference in I'll say their eagerness to be coached or their education level. And I don't mean by, what they make in math, but like, do they, maybe a way to put it is, we still say this, that we used to, back when you and I were growing up, Ken, that we used to know who the good people in our events were for Team USA and all that kind of stuff. And today's kids, they just don't know all that stuff, yada, yada, yada. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I ran high school track and I don't think I knew everybody that was good in my, I don't think I paid attention to it as well, mostly because it was harder. There was no Twitter and things like that. We had track and field news once a month. I think that's all in runner's world. That's all I got.
Yeah.
What have you noticed from athletes as you've gone through 80s, 90s, early 2000s, 2010 teens, and now 2024? Are kids still eager to be coached in track and field? Are they still eager?
Yeah, I think
it,
you have and I'm just talking about my school
that's
because
right.
I'm more familiar with it.
Mhm.
You have different groups of kids. You'll have the real athlete who is uh, committed to track and field, and that's what they want. And you have no problem training them at all. And they know everybody who worldwide, really, because they're on all the social medias and all of the things looking at these great athletes. And you have that group. You have a group of people, I call them football players who run track, and then you have track athletes who play football because they have their preferences. So you have the football players who want to come out and get faster, and they'll come out and can you run a 400-meter workout with them? No way. You're just pounding your head against the wall to do that because they're not going to do it. And then you have a group of kids, and we have an international baccalaureate program. And on their resume, they need to have activities that they participated in high school.
Right.
And they come out and for track because in our program, everyone gets a uniform and everyone competes, not in every meet, but we offer meets to where everyone gets to put that uniform on and compete. So they come out as part of their high school resume to do that. So you have, a whole group of them. We had men and women this year. We ended up with a total of 137 kids on the track team.
Wow.
Out of those, if you wanted to cut, I probably could have cut down to 25 guys and 20 girls who were the real horses of the team, and done that. So, there's a whole different group, and they all have, some of them will try to go hide during a specific workout. Yeah, typical young kids.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure that's changed then. I keep hearing about how today's athletes are different. I ran in the early 90s. But what, has track become any bigger of a part of my career in life than anybody else's, right? I did that kind of stuff. Not because I wasn't dedicated to the sport, it's because I was 16 and was like, man, I don't want to run repeat quarters. Not today.
Right, exactly. So, but we have had our share of very good athletes. Over the last 8 years, we've had 61 kids sign college scholarships to continue participating in college at all different levels. Some of them small private schools, Ivy League schools, some of the bigger schools.
So cool.
So we have a good group, and they've done that basically because of their academics and their athletic ability.
Right. Yeah.
So we've had some go to JUCO.
Nice.
And then gone on after that. So, but we've had some good athletes who have come out of there. Just to name a couple, you may know them. Clifton Campbell, who was an NCAA champion at Auburn, came out. He's now the CEO of Hope in Kansas City, Missouri.
Wow.
Andre Scott, who jumped 53.7 1/2 in the
Yeah,
triple
of
jump,
course.
who's
Yeah.
now at Ole Miss.
Yeah.
And his son was the #2 high school triple jumper last year
Yeah.
in the nation. So, we have a kid, you probably never heard of him, but he was a two-time uh, double state champion in the long and the triple jump, who went to Princeton, uh, graduated from there, an attorney back in Florida now. We've had we've had some real, those are just a few of some real good
Yeah. Yeah.
kids who, because of track and field, who have gone beyond. And uh, just thinking the other day, one of the highlights I can think of when looking back at some of my athletes, and when you look on Facebook and all of these kids who grew up in a small community, who had never done anything in their lives, are now going to France and Japan and
Right.
traveling with their wives to foreign countries. And that's
That's
fantastic
so
that
cool.
they've, gone beyond and done that. So
That's awesome.
yeah, I enjoy that. Like I said, I have loved what I've done.
Before we get into a couple other questions, you mentioned NIL earlier. Are you seeing, so it feels like we're still learning and experimenting with it on the college side. What are you seeing specifically in Florida?
Well, there's a specific for Florida high school that's specific. Uh, and there are rules, and it's just going into effect right now.
Okay.
Just off the top of my head, without looking at the from the Department of Education. For instance, no one connected with your booster club can get anything for one of your athletes. A coach can't do that for one of your athletes. Uh, it's supposed to be, I guess, pretty much the athlete working with Dairy Queen, or something like that. So
Right.
there are some stipulations. We'll see how they're violated, which they
Yeah.
will be.
Yeah. Yeah.
That.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the rules will change on it and
Yep.
make things tougher and
Yeah.
so forth. So the NIL's new
Yeah. Yeah. It's
in
interesting
Florida.
what's happening. You nailed the description of what's happening in college, right? It's like, well, here were the initial rules, and then, they get violated, and then the rules change. And now it's getting close to where it's like, okay, well, there are no rules anymore. If the coach wants to help get you
Exactly,
an eye out. Yeah.
exactly.
So it'll be interesting
Uh,
to see how that goes on the high school side as
yeah,
well.
on the college level, what I share with everybody is what's legal now gave SMU the death penalty in the
Yeah.
80s.
Right. Yeah.
And it's
Good
unbelievable.
point.
Yeah, it's
That's a good
unbelievable.
point. That's a
Yeah.
really good point, which decimated that football program.
So,
Yeah.
so as far a couple of things, as far as we run a lot of track meets
Hmm.
at our facility,
Okay.
and we generate a lot of income from those track meets. Well, back in the old days, if you wanted to go to a track meet, you had to mail your entries in the snail mail,
Right. Right.
or you had to hand carry them wherever you were going to go at a certain deadline. Then the greatest invention was the fax machine, because then you could fax those entries to them. And then came the automatic timing and
Yeah.
all of the computer stuff now, to where it's hard to get any better, I think, at running meets than the way is now.
I would say how you ran a meet in 1990 is drastically different than how you run a meet today in 2024.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Drastically,
absolutely.
drastically.
Yeah.
So earlier, Ken, you mentioned about your leadership roles inside of FACA. Um, Talk to us about how did, some of these, you've had some fantastic experiences with USATF, Team USA. How did all this, why, and what was your motivation? Why did you do it?
Well,
You weren't busy enough?
um, I moved to the Orlando area, and well, there were several things. For instance, there was a gentleman in West Palm Beach, Florida, after I'd moved to Orlando, by the name of Dick Malier, old-time track coach. He'd coached football at Palm Beach High School. He'd coached Burt Reynolds and football. And he had a young man who came to his school, whose father happened to live in Palm Beach on the ocean. So they had a little bit of money, who was the heir of the A&P grocery
Oh, yeah.
change. And he wanted his son to have a lot of experience, and sat down with Dick and said, let's get all the best high school kids in Florida and form a club and take them to all the junior Olympic meets. And so Dick contacted some of us coaches who had had some success and formed a club called Track Florida. And Malir, Mike McIntosh, who was the individual who bankrolled it, paid all expenses for kids to go to the Junior Olympics.
Wow.
All of that stuff. He with the great athletes who needed to improve their test scores, he paid for the study courses for them to take, and so on and so forth. And there for about 6-7 years, I mean, we were dominating the National Junior Olympics. I got involved in that. During that time, I had sent a number of athletes to Auburn University, and Mel Rosen was a head coach who was big in the TAC at that time.
Right.
And he called me one day and asked me. He said, and Steve Simmons was a part of this also. Steve.
Oh, yeah.
And they were big on trying to put a high school coach or a JUCO coach on a national team.
Okay.
And there had been several from Florida. John Hemmer was one of them. I don't know if you know John.
I do.
He's retired now in North Carolina. He coached at Oak Ridge High School.
I was gonna say Oak Ridge, Winter Park, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was, he had been on I think the 1985 junior team. So Mel called me, asked me if I would like to go on a track trip with the national team. And I said, sure. So between him and Simmons, I was appointed as an assistant coach. And on that team, we were the first international track and field team to go to Cuba since before the revolution.
Wow.
That's another story in itself. So that was part of a junior trip at that time. That James Perkins was in charge of the junior program with the TAC. And so we did Havana, Cuba, then we went on up to Vancouver, British Columbia, and then to Pullman, Washington for meets that summer.
Wow.
And evidently I did an okay job, because then in 1990, I was put on the world junior team to go to Bulgaria. And that was another great, right during the Iron Curtain was coming down at that time, and we were in an Eastern European country. Great experience. And I've got to tell you, it was at that point that, we're not really coach's education, but my thing is, and it still is to this day, I don't want to watch an event in the stadium. I want to be on the warm-up track, in the training track, to watch everybody. And it was in Bulgaria. I was in Plovdiv, Bulgaria. I was sitting in there. Our athletes were training and stuff, and I was watching the Soviets and the Bulgarians doing triple jump drills and stuff. And there was this Bulgarian coach who was sitting there, and I heard him speaking some English. So I asked him, I was seeing him do bounding and alternate hop steps and all of this stuff. And I said, well, this is interesting because this is the way I was trained in college, and this is the way I train triple jumpers. And he said, oh, yeah. He says, you Americans, you're always looking for something new, and you never stay with something long enough to show that it's important. And good lesson to learn.
Yeah.
And that was true. And, in this day and age, you have this parachute running, and all the kids are into gimmicks. And they like the gimmicks, and a lot of the club coaches use the gimmicks, saying this is going to help you get better. But the old tried and tested methods, you can run resistance running with a partner, or things like that you get just as much, if not more, value out of than you do that. And that's when I first started to dig into the research and stuff. And I'd already written several articles for Athletic Journal and Scholastic Coach about training for the jumps and the sprints and the relays and stuff. And you sit and talk with people. In '97, after Bulgaria, I was a part of the USA versus Great Britain dual meet at Gateshead. Well, the head coach was uh let me see, Clyde Hart. And for 5 days, you sit and talk to Clyde Hart about running and training and what his athletes do, and so forth. And evidently, I did okay because I moved to my first World Championships indoors in '97 in Paris, and then the first big meet, really big meet, I was the jumps coach on the '91 World Championships in Edmonton, wow, Canada, which was a great experience again. I used to walk every morning with Orrin Richburg. He and I would go out for a walk, and we would talk track, we would talk this, we would talk that. And back in those days with USATF PAC at that time, you had no education in being a national coach or knowing national rules. That's something that you had to read the rule book yourself, then you learn by doing, and through different situations, and you kind of stumbled through it and played through it until you had some pretty good expertise in it. And so after the 2001 World Championships, I was the head coach of the world junior team in Grosseto, Italy. And after that meet, Steve Simmons says, he set me down, great advice from these people. And he says, a high school coach is never going to become the head Olympic coach, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, some college coach will. And he says, and the chances of becoming an assistant coach as a high school coach isn't going to be great either, because they're going to select college coaches. And I thought about that, and I said, yeah, I think you're right. He says, you need to go the manager route, because managers have an opportunity. An Olympic coach at that time is only going to go maybe once every 4 years, and that's it, and they're done. He said, but a manager is relied upon as you go down. And I said, okay. And that's when Sandy Snow came in as the international team manager. And I became the head manager of the world junior team in '04. I'm sorry, I was in '06 in Beijing, and then in '08 in Bydgoszcz, Poland. And then I've really led kind of a blessed career,
Yeah.
no doubt about it. And then I was selected as the alternate head manager on the 2009 World Championship team for Berlin. And Manny Batista
Yeah.
was the head manager. Well, his daughter was getting ready to go from California to Boston to college.
Hmm.
And his wife was insistent that he and she take her over there. So he had to give up the Berlin head manager. And so I became the head manager in Berlin.
Wow.
And based on that, in 2010 indoor, I was the indoor manager for the World Championship in Doha. 2011 outdoors in Daegu, South Korea. 2012 in Istanbul, I went because I'd been selected for the Olympic manager, I went as the Olympic manager, not as the head manager of the meet, but they wanted someone with the Olympic team to be there because the athletes were going to. And so I was in Istanbul, 2012, the Olympic Games, first high school coach to ever be a head manager of a U.S. Olympic team. So
Wow.
Simmons was right.
Yeah, Steve Simmons, dude.
And then in 15 in Beijing, champion for the World Championships, 2019 in Doha for the World Championships. In between that, I was the Seven Nation meet in Glasgow, Scotland. And that's nothing since then. You know, you get old and you move on.
You age out of these things, right? Well,
Yeah.
so we probably feel like we know what a head coach of an international team and the assistant coaches, the sprint coach, et cetera. We kind of feel like we know what they do. What does the manager do? So what are your duties as assigned and
Well,
your role?
okay, can I backtrack a little bit on that
Please,
so I
yeah.
can, because I want to get Jimmy Carnes back in the story. Uh, well, through my success at Seminole High School, and because he knew me through the Florida track meet and stuff, in 1988, for the first and only time ever, they had the National Masters Championship, the National Junior Championship, the National Junior Olympics Championship, and the National Championships. In 88, that was the last year they had a national championships. Now they only have an Olympic trials during an Olympic year, not
Right,
the.
right.
So the national championships was in Tampa, the Masters in Orlando, uh, the junior in Tallahassee,
Wow,
and the Junior Olympics in Gainesville.
wow.
And in 1986, they had the first World Junior Championships in Greece.
Hmm.
That was the first time they held them. Well, they also held the first Junior Pan American Games in Orlando
Oh.
in that year in 86, and I was the field operations manager. And that's where I got to know John Chaplin.
Hmm.
So, uh, so anyway, in 88, evidently Jimmy saw something in me and got me involved in the organization, administration, and the operation of those meets
Hmm.
in in Florida. And I spent an entire summer and of course, did it all for free. They put me up and everything, did it all for free. And I got a heck of an education,
Yeah.
which from all standpoints of running a meet, a big time meet,
Yeah.
everything, I got to meet a lot of people, a lot of coaches, a lot of athletes and so forth. And I credit him And that experience to this day, with me having the knowledge to become a manager of an Olympic team.
Right.
But specifically, duties varied. Uh, as a manager, all the conference calls, so on and so forth, that you have prior to the competition, the uh, going to the national meets, uh, signing the athletes up for the team, disseminating the information, concerning the championships and so forth, communicating with them. And remarkably, one of the most difficult things was roommates on trips,
Oh.
because you had to be careful who you paired with. The women's team was the world's worst, because there were you had more personalities with the women at that time than you did with the men. But and then you had to communicate airline things, organize pickups for them. Uh, when they came in, the Olympic Games in London was a little bit tough, because, as you would imagine, with the uh, European season and those athletes competing in Europe, they don't all get on a flight from the US and fly to London. They just come in from all over the world.
Right, right.
And organizing and doing what needed to be done. And I'll talk specifically about the London experience, because that's probably a little more involved. But it involved, we flew over in February, the two head managers, and then the international, Sandy Snow, and to where the USOC at that time, now the USOPC, they had a workshop on everything associated with what was going to go on with the Olympics. We toured the village before it was finished. We toured the track. We saw where the athletes were going to be able to sit at the games, where they were going to live. That they unveiled the 2012 Olympic wardrobe to us before they put it out. And so we sat through 2 days of workshops doing that. We spent one day in Birmingham in the UK, where our training camp was going to be.
Right.
Going, looking around at all the facilities and so forth, the hotel we were going to stay at, and so forth. And then, of course, going to the Olympic trials, which was involved signing the team up, making sure they had all the information that was specific, even though it had been sent out to them. To give you an example, I can't remember what they called it, but everyone had to go into every athlete had to have a workshop on the Olympic creed and all of this stuff. That was all sent into them. Well, they can't go to the Olympic Games till this has been certified. And it was all happening during the trials. And there were some athletes, they don't read their stuff or their email. They had and there was one of the throwers who had qualified that day for the Olympic team, saw him in a restaurant that night, said he was out the next morning. And I said, well, have you done the workshop for the USOC? And he said, what workshop? And I said, well, you can't go until you get this done. And so he had to change his plan. But the communication is just
I can't imagine.
imperative.
Yeah.
I mean, the phone calls you have to make. Of course, myself, I relied on emails a lot with the athletes, but every email I sent to an athlete, I copied to their personal coach and to their agent if they had one. So everybody had the information, everybody. So the communication is very important. What's important as a manager if you don't know something, you don't guess at it. You go
Mm,
back and you look it up and you find out, because you don't want to have a rerun of the 7,200 meters where these athletes missed their
mhm,
start.
right.
So, I mean, very anal things that you have to
Yeah.
make sure of. Well, I spent 2 days in Birmingham, where I got to see the Queen of England at that time.
Mm.
And then I went into the village with Sandy Snow, and I went into the village the day it opened. And I spent my time, the US team, um, they either flew into Birmingham to camp, and then they would come to London and get their credential later, or some of them who were in the Europe would fly into London. They would come to the housing there, to the village, get their credential, and then we would put them on a transport back to Birmingham for camp, and that's where they spent 10 days of training. And because track and field wasn't until the second half of the games,
Mhm.
they didn't come in the first day of the Olympics. They came in later than that. So I spent the entire time there. I would get a call from the USOC at, I can think of one athlete at 3 a.m. saying, you have an athlete in the welcome center, you need to go get him. And that operated on a 24-hour basis. So I would get out of bed, I would walk down, get him in, get his credential, get him back to his room where he would be staying. And then either the next day or the day after, make sure he got on our transport to go back uh, to training camp.
Dude.
And I spent a lot of pre-Olympics doing that. Showing, I showed them around the facilities, where the cafeteria. I mean, I
Right.
was the tour guide for that point. Uh, and then you get up to the games itself. You go to the technical meeting. You get all of the mumbo jumbo. Then you have to conduct the technical meeting for the athletes and their coaches, letting them know the specifics of what's going on and what they need to be uh, aware of, and so forth. And in the meantime, you've ridden the buses to the warm-up track and back, knowing how long it's going to take a bus to get there, so
Right.
the athletes
Right.
will know when they need to get a bus. And then you develop a call sheet, which um, internationally, there's 3 call rooms that an athlete goes through.
Hmm.
And I'll just start from the beginning on all of it. So we would develop a call sheet saying that I'll just throw out something that it's going to take 30 minutes to get on the bus to go to the warm-up track. You should probably give yourself 3 hours prior to your call time. Most athletes only took 2, but you gave them a range, and they would say, why so often? I said, what if there's a bus accident? What if,
Mhm, mhm.
and you get delayed? You want to make sure you're on that bus to where you don't cut it, because they're not going to hold the race up
Right.
at all. If you're not there, you're not there. Doesn't matter how good you are.
Right.
So it would say first call was usually uh, 10 minutes before the final call. They would say the final call was at 9 a.m. They would say first call 8:50.
Mhm.
And so the athlete's warming up, and you have to make sure, really, communication with the coach, uh, that they're going to have to be in that call room at 9 a.m. because if they shut the door, you're not competing. Doesn't matter how good you are. And I know in Beijing for the Olympics, a good athlete from another nation was locked out of that call room. So you make sure they want to get up there, and most of them will come up and they'll stand right outside that door with minutes left. And then you have to check. You have your shoes? You have your spikes? Yes. Do you have spikes in your shoes? Yes. I mean, you go through everything. I'll give you a good example in Berlin. Tyson comes up. Tyson Gay comes up. Got your shoes? Yes. Got your spikes? Yes. You have your bib numbers? Shit. He had to run back and get his bib number. It was back at the warm-up area. He hadn't put them on. So you have to make sure they have what they need to compete in to go into that call room. The first call room, you go in, you show them the credential because they have to have that credential. We had problems in Doha with that. You have to have that credential. They look at it, they find your name, they check it off, they send you to call room 2. In call room 2, they check all their uniform to make sure it's an acceptable national uniform that has to be approved ahead of time. And that's another thing you had to do is every piece of equipment that an athlete could wear from the USA had to be taken to the World Athletics now and photographed. So they knew if there was a question, they could go to the photograph and know it had been approved because they checked the advertising labels on them to make sure they don't exceed the requirement and so forth. So they check the uniforms, they go through their bags for prohibited items. No cell phones, no radios, no headphones can go in. Just whatever the meet has decided can't go in. Can't go in. In Doha in 2019, they took Coleman's little tape measure to where he measured his block placements, said he couldn't do it. After they do all that, they send you to call room 3. Call room 3, they can continue to warm up, and it's under the stadium. At that time, now what they do is now they give the bibs to the athletes in call room 3 because they have the transponders in them. All athletes have transponders in them now. And so they go into call room 3, they're given their bib. They continue to warm up, and all of this has been orchestrated, choreographed by the World Athletics, and they have it down to a science. When heat 1's on the track, heat 5's in call room 1. Heat 2 goes off, the next one moves up, and so forth. It's just one thing after another. So the managers are the last person they see before they come out after the race, going into the call room, having to make sure they have everything that's appropriate.
These teams have,
to be honest with you, when the gun goes off, the managers run the meet run the team for the US.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
Because coaches can't go in.
Right.
Physicians can't go in. There's their own World Athletics physicians and so forth. So it's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
A lot of responsibility.
And these teams have somewhere in the 150 range of kids in all different disciplines, from multis to sprinters to distance run. I mean, this seems like it's almost like, how do you do? I mean, this is amazing, actually.
Well, you don't sleep.
Yeah, okay, that sounds right.
I mean, you're always working. You don't sleep. There are other things. For instance, each federation is awarded money based upon the medalists they have in the previous championships. And the World Athletics will give money back for travel to a championship. For instance, I think each athlete traveling from going to Berlin, they got a stipend of $1,500 to travel. If an agent could get a ticket cheaper than that, they did, and then there was money left over for whatever purposes. Well, you had to go through the call room. In other words, and I can give you an example in an event, and again, no names, where we had 4 athletes in an event in Berlin, and at the warm-up track, I had to turn in our entries for the next day by 9 a.m., so I had to go up to the stadium to turn them in. And one of the other managers was checking athletes through, and for the next event. So I got back, I said, is everyone through? He said, yes. Good. So a little later, I get a call from one of the coaches in the stands saying, why isn't so-and-so competing in this field event? And I said, I don't know. So I yell at the manager, did so-and-so go through the call room? He said, yeah, he went through. Or, I'm sorry, he said, no, he didn't go through. And I said, well, you told me he did. He said he wasn't competing, so he didn't go through. But he did go through to watch. He took his bib number and went through. So according to the IAAF at that time, he was a competitor that day, but he didn't participate. Well, an athlete has to be withdrawn from a competition. So by him going through the call room, he wasn't withdrawn. So what was going to happen was USA Track and Field was going to have to refund that $1,500 back to the World Athletics for his. So, I called Sandy, and first time I ever heard her cuss. And she said, see what you can do. So in one of the requirements of a manager, the Technical Information Center, the TIC, that's the heartbeat of the World Championships or an Olympic Games. It's where everything comes to. If you want to file a protest, you have to go there. If you want to pick up something, you have to go there, so on and so forth. And so she said, go to the TIC to see if there's something you could do. So I had made friends with people in there, the Germans who were working in there. And I went up and I said, listen, I got a big problem. And they said, what? And I said, well, when I was up here giving you our entries on time, and of course you have to lie. You say, well, the person wasn't doing their job back at the warm-up track and allowed someone who wasn't competing to go through. I need to withdraw them. Will you let me withdraw? And they said, yeah, what time do you need to withdraw them by? So you fill out the information and you withdraw them. That goes to the World Athletics, and they see he was withdrawn, and that was fine. We had a similar in the same meet where one of the marathoners who was injured, who got injured while he was in camp there, went and picked up his bib and walked through. And we didn't catch that because we didn't know it. And so I got a call 2 weeks after from Sandy saying, hey, we have to send $1,500 back for so-and-so because he went into the call. I says, we don't know. So she went ahead and handled that with the World Athletics. So
I never knew how important the call rooms were.
Oh yeah, no, you
Holy cow.
cannot get shut out.
Yeah.
Once they go in that first call, no one with your federation sees them again until they come out after their race.
And you've got some about how many, I say kids, how many athletes you have, and you have all different experience levels too. You have some kids that this is their first ever championship team. You have guys that are veterans of, this is their third, fourth one. They know what to do, although it's probably a little different from every, whether Beijing and Berlin and things like that. But to be able to, I don't even know how to put it. I mean, I don't want to say babysitting them because that's kind of derogatory, but you are hand-holding these guys and gals to make sure that all that work they've done to qualify for the team and their dreams of the Olympics or the World Championship team, that they actually make it to the starting line.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, I'll tell you, and probably well, I'll say two things. Number one is in Beijing, we were at the warm-up track and a pole vault or a high jump standard wasn't working. This was back in 206. And the team coach there was saying, hey, can we get some pliers? Anybody get a pair of pliers here? And I reached in my bag and pulled out a pair of pliers. And so he started using them. And he said to another coach, he said, this guy's got everything. And the coach said, he's a high school coach. Because high school coaches have to have everything. We carry spikes in. And that was a great compliment because, as a JUCO coach, you didn't necessarily have managers who carried spikes. You had them in your bag. You had the medical stuff with you. You had everything with you. And so experiences at that level and at the high school level prepares you for things that other people can't handle.
Great point.
And, and I could go through a bunch of stuff that has gone on at some of these international meets, but I enjoyed the Olympics. I look at it as a job. I spent 30 days in the village and at the stadium, never seen anything outside that. So was I happy to get home? I was happy it was over. I averaged 3 hours of sleep a night for 30 days. And, and there's things that have to be done, deadlines to where I would pack my bag the night before, hang it on the door handle of my room so I wouldn't forget to take it the morning when I left. And that's what all the managers face. Every one of them face. When you do that, it really is it's a job. It's a very important job. And the managers who go on the trips who think it's a vacation, they normally fail.
Ken, not bad for a kid from Little Town, Iowa.
Yeah, 2,000 people.
2,000 people. You've been in charge of more than 2,000 people.
Yeah.
At this point.
Well, I came from a family whose father never knew a day off. He'd been in the Navy, came home operating an appliance business and so forth. I never left the state of Iowa until I was 19 years old and went to the Kansas Relays as a freshman in college.
Wow.
And now, because of track and field, I've been to 49 different countries. So,
wow.
Like I said, it's been a blessed career. I've enjoyed every minute. All my experiences from the high school, I've been an age group coach and on up to Olympians, the elite athletes. The only difference between them and the high school athletes is their ability. They have the same doubts, the same problems, the same everything high school kids have. They're just faster.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But I love it. And when I'm done, when the final race is run, put me on the plane, send me home so I can get back to coaching my high school kids.
That's it. All right, Ken, wrap us up here. There are many high school coaches listening right now, and they're hearing, whether they're in their first year, 10th year, doesn't matter. And they're hearing these experiences. And maybe sometimes what I don't like, as a former high school coach myself, I don't like sometimes the, I'll say this word, the belittling that we have of high school coaches out there. Sometimes, so sometimes we're our own worst enemy, coaches in general. But I've had many, many high school coaches here, and, I will tell anybody, I love busting myths. So the whole myth of a high school coach can't coach college and all these kind of things. And here's a myth that a high school coach can't be intimately involved in the Olympic Team USA and all these experiences. 49 countries. That's crazy. I haven't been in 49 states. You've been in more countries than states. What advice would you give to a high school coach out there right now that wants to do wants to be more involved in track and field. And again, I said this earlier in the podcast, coaching your team is enough. Trust me, your influence, your positive impact that you make on 14, 18-year-old kids, it's enough. But I know there's some coaches that either they want to do other things, whether it's coaching education, Team USA, age group, inside their state organizations, or want to coach college, etc. What advice would you give them for their future careers?
Well, to get involved like I've been involved in, I will just spit out what Jimmy Carnes told me. You need to become involved in your local association, USA Track and Field Association, go to your state meetings, run for office. I started off as the youth chair in Florida. Become involved, whether an official, a coach, or whatever, in your local association. You need to go to the national conferences for USA Track and Field. You need to get to know the people. Coach Carnes was adamant. He would say, you go to the conventions, you go to the meetings, you sit in the meetings, and you're heard at the meetings. And he said, if you have a suggestion or you want to be heard, you always make that suggestion for the betterment of the sport, not for the betterment of your personal team. And that's kind of the motto I've lived by. I've gone from, I'm on the executive committee of men's track and field now at USA Track and Field, and also for development at USA Track and Field. So you get involved, and pretty soon you're asked to do things, and you continue to do things. You continue to contribute, and it doesn't matter if you're a coach. Be an official. Get certified as an official. Get involved in officiating USA TF youth meets and so forth within your association. Get assigned to work the Florida relays, the FSU relays, those type things. And pretty soon you branch out. Maybe you're going to be doing the SEC meet or the Big 12 meet or something. Go to the meetings at the annual convention, get involved with the officials there. Mike Armstrong, who's, Mike.
Very well.
I first met him because he was the Arkansas official when Lance was at Arkansas, and that's how I got to know Mike Armstrong. I mean, it's a small world. Track and field's a small world, and you meet a lot of people. But if you become involved at the high school level in Florida, the FACA, Florida Athletic Coaches Association, become the chair of a district, become the vice chair of track and field, be a contributor. And again, people who just propose things because it's their program, they never get anywhere in those organizations. You want to be proactive for the, and because you're a person in the FACA, you're also a member of the National Athletic Coaches, National High School Athletics Association. So you go to those symposiums, conventions, and you can become involved in that also. So there's all kinds of ways to contribute to the betterment of your sport. And I learned a long time ago from people like Coach Rosen, Dean Hayes, Jimmy Carnes, that you have to pay it forward. You have to, and this may sound kind of trite or whatever, but when you coach, you can see the other coaches who have potentials to really do some things for track and field. So you try to help those people. You try to help them, tell them to get to the next level, help them to do this, help them to do that. So you pay it forward. So there's people coming behind you. I've had a lot of people coming before me. Brooks Johnson was a big mentor of mine. And I've known him way back in 1975. So yeah, you got to pay it forward to other coaches you've got to leave your sport healthy
Yeah. I love
and make sure it's healthier when you're out of it.
I love that. Get involved, get to know the people. And really, that last thing to me is a big part. Be a contributor. I like that because that's selfless, not selfish. That's how can I help you? There will be things that come along for you because of that. But if you're helping other people, helping our sport, helping other coaches, I think that's one of the greatest things that you can do to be involved and help move our sport
Yeah.
forward. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the most amazing things is you hate to get beat by people, but when that team that beats your team has had great coaching, how can you get mad because they've had
Mhm.
great coaching? So that's a person you want to help moving forward because
Mhm.
you know that they're involved and they're a good coach and so forth. So there's, John Himmer and I are a good example of that.
Mhm.
We were bitter rivals
Hmm.
against each other, but that never interfered with our friendship, our personal relationship beyond that.
That's awesome. Ken, thank you so much. We
Yeah,
could,
I've taken a lot of your time today.
but
So,
we could keep recording too. Now, there's a lot of
so
stories you still got that we haven't gotten at.
yeah, there are.
I'm just so grateful for you, man. I think about, I don't like the words just and only. I'm gonna say it this way. If you had only been a high school coach, that would have been enough. I mean, it would have been amazing what you're doing. Again, the positive impact you make on young people, it's immeasurable. Your leadership through Team USA's and inside of FACA and many more. Those are things that we need. We need people. We need good people. We need selfless people to step into those positions to help the next Ken Brauman. There's a kid right now growing up in Florida that has no clue what their life and impact is going to be on track and field, but it's going to be because of coaches like you that help mentor that young man or woman into
Well, I will, if I could say one more
please,
thing,
please.
is that I've never wanted to be anything but a high school coach.
Hmm.
I've never wanted to go to that next level because I enjoy finding a kid in the hallways, talking them into coming out for track and watching them develop and maybe prosper from there. And one of the
That's awesome.
most satisfying experiences I can have is when I'm at a world championship or Olympic Games and I see a U.S. athlete on that podium. First thing I'm thinking is, what? There was a high school coach that
Yeah,
started that kid
that's
out
exactly
somewhere
right.
that motivated them to become better and better and better to go on to the next level and the next level.
That's
And
exactly
so
right.
the grassroots is valuable.
I think I was just thinking that as you were about to say that. Yeah, I think Ryan Krauser, he was in high school, coached by a high school coach. Sydney, she was in high school, coached by a high school coach. Noah, it was in high school. All these great all these great athletes, it all started with a high school coach.
An example in Florida is Jenny Simpson
Hmm.
was coached by the person who is now the FACA track chairman, Jay Getty.
Oh, yeah.
And she went on to Colorado, become a world champion and an
Yeah.
Olympic medalist.
Yeah.
It all started with a little pigtail girl running
Yep.
around the track,
That's right. Oh, man,
and
I
look
love
what
it.
it's become. So
Ken, thank you so much, my friend.
I've enjoyed it.
This has been great. I'm grateful for you, grateful for the contributions you've made and the contributions you continue to make. Let's not forget, we are not
So,
retired. We are coming back to Florida. We are coaching some more.
well,
How much longer are we going, my friend?
oh, I don't know. I've had some interest here from an international school to come to
Wow.
come work with them.
Oh,
And
man.
you know, there's a good song out now that "Don't Let the Old Man In."
I haven't heard
Have you
that.
country
No.
western song?
Okay.
I'm trying to think. Toby Keith, who
Okay.
just passed away.
Yeah.
He sings that. And one of the favorite lines in there is, if you didn't know the day you were born, would you know how old you are?
Huh.
And don't let the old man in. So that's my motto. That's what I thrive on. I'm going to keep the old man out as long as possible.
I love it. We're better for it. Thank you so much, my friend. Guys, thank you for being
Okay.
here.
I
Again,
know. Thank you. I mean,
oh,
it's taken a little bit to get this done, but this is the perfect time to have done it.
it was
So,
it was all worth it. The wait was
yeah,
100% worth it, my friend.
yeah. No, I appreciate it a whole bunch.
You're very welcome. Thank you guys for being here. Join us next week. We'll do it all over again. Hit rewind on this one. Go share this with other high school coaches out there. This is phenomenal. This can and will be you if you just, like you said, get involved, get to know the people, and be a contributor. I think that's the greatest advice I've ever heard. So thanks, guys. See you next week. We'll do it all
All
over
right.
again.
Thank you. Uh-huh.